Our journey begins here in Sanford at the Amtrak Auto Train terminal. Welcome back to some of the Sunshine State Rails. On Christmas Day 2019, my family and I have decided to take a vacation up to Altoona, Pennsylvania and the famous Horseshoe Curve, hitting other rail fanning spots on our way home. But to save us the driving, we're going to take a new experience on the Amtrak Auto Train. Getting our car on the train was easy. Having our tickets ready ahead of time made getting into the waiting room and checking in a pinch. Though we had gotten there at about 1:45, as the latest check-in time was 2:30, it was a fairly long wait before our estimated departure time at 4 p.m. Us passengers were allowed to board the train at 2:15, and by 3 o'clock, the train was beginning to be set together. But by 3:40, we were already on our way out. Looks like they had gotten everyone and everything on board this Christmas Day a little early. 20 minutes early departure is nothing I can complain about. As we glide out of town, I'd like to explain some things that have gone on recently. The new intro that you have seen at the beginning of the video was voted on by my friends on Instagram. Thanks to everyone there for helping me make that decision. What was also voted on by my people on Instagram was that this video, instead of being multiple videos, will be one long video showcasing everything at one time. For that, I'll try to shorten it up as much as I can, but I'd like to include all the details, considering that this was one fun trip. Turns out, thanks to the heads up from one of my railfan friends that we'll see later on this trip, the PO5225 we were on tonight had 3 engines pulling it today. Something not exactly rare for Auto Train, but at the same time not seen every day. Since there weren't many people on the train that day, I was able to switch sides of the car whenever I pleased, and I did when I heard that my railfan friend Larry had set up at the DeLand Amtrak station to catch my train.
Kind of baffled up here. We got like, I don't know how many pounds. The brakes aren't working. Cool. Just, you're doing the right thing. I'm all behind you, and I'm getting in touch with everybody as I can, and no worries, eh? Yeah, he's probably. What are y'all doing? Using that dynamic to stop the train? I was. Wow. Okay. All right. Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to call them, let them know.
After the sun went down, it was time to go have dinner served by the train. I finished early, so I came back to my car, which was completely empty. That's when I turned the radio on and heard that broadcast just south of Folkestone.
So, I don't know if I'm going to include this in the video or not, but the Auto Train brakes aren't working. Oh boy, we're like right around the corner from Folkestone too. Let's see how we do.
After stopping the train just south of Folkestone, it was found that they lost their air pressure, which contributed to the brakes not working, as well as, surprise, surprise, positive train control wasn't working again. But once they got it back online and the air pressure back, we were all set to go and crawled through the town of Folkestone. It is also now that we have left our Sunshine State Rails behind, and we'll be back on them in about a week.
For those of you wondering, we're in Folkestone, Georgia. They like to take pictures of the train here, so we slowed down so they can take some pictures.
They say they were moving slow because we were going through a popular rail fanning town, but I'm not sure how legit that is.
No, I think you're slowing down because you lost air pressure and PTC.
Once we got through the quiet town of Folkestone, Georgia, it was pretty much pitch black all the way from there to Lorton, Virginia the next morning. So that's when I did my best to get some sleep and woke up the next morning hearing that our arrival to Lorton Station would be about 2 hours early, even after everything that went down back there at Folkestone. By the time 7:40 a.m. was on the clock, we were arriving in the Lorton Auto Train terminal. Though we weren't allowed to get off the train for about another hour due to preparations in the waiting room, we were able to see the Dash 8 that was stationed here taking the auto racks off of the southern end of our train to break the train apart to unload everybody's automobiles. We were in the waiting room for about 15 minutes before we received our car back, and once we did, we hit the road for Altoona. It was roughly a 3.5 hour drive there, and once we got there, we checked into our hotel in Altoona and went straight down to the tracks. The first spot we would hit at the end of this day would be Brickyard Railroad Crossing near Altoona, one of the only railroad crossings on the Norfolk Southern Pittsburgh subdivision, so here is the best place, so this would be the best place to go if you're trying to get horns on the trains that pass here, because there really aren't any other crossings on this entire line. I will say, Norfolk Southern crews are pretty friendly, so there's a pretty good chance that you'd get a horn show from one of them anyway. This was the evening of December 26, 2019, and our first catch would be an NS tank train headed up the Allegheny Mountains and will reach the summit at Crescent, Pennsylvania. The Norfolk Southern Pittsburgh sub in between Altoona and Crescent, Pennsylvania is one long uprise or downfall from the Allegheny Mountains. Headed from Altoona toward Crescent, you are headed up the Allegheny Mountains. Horseshoe Curve was an engineering marvel that helped these trains get over the mountains so quickly. Around the full length of Horseshoe Curve, trains are either rising or dropping about 122 feet either way. As I said before, Crescent is the summit of the Allegheny Mountains, while Altoona is the very bottom. So, for trains coming up or down the mountain, you will see NS's SD40Es as helpers on these trains headed either direction. As far as I know, Altoona, Pennsylvania in this part of the Pittsburgh sub is the only place that you can find Norfolk Southern's SD40Es, as they were overhauled and rebuilt specifically for this purpose. Though the helpers aren't always needed, as shown by this train that doesn't have any helpers headed up the mountain. As we sat here, there were more trains to come. For most of the time that we're in Altoona, railfanning between different places, I won't be narrating too much, but I will talk in the certain parts that I feel necessary or would like to explain certain details. have our first example of the SD40Es in action. Another common sight in this region, the helper locomotives are constantly moving back and forth between jobs on the other sides of the mountain, so commonly you will see power sets of helpers just moving back and forth between two different points. It is now Friday, December 27th, and it is today that we will make our run to Horseshoe Curve, a place that I will never forget. Arriving at Horseshoe Curve, there was already a tank train coming down the mountain. But believe it or not, the tank train was not the first thing I saw. All I could see was the vast mountain ranges and the fog covering them, along with a little bit of snow that was left behind by the shade that was covering the mountains. Nobody can change my mind on the fact that this is the most beautiful place that I have ever been to or seen. I'll tell you now, it doesn't matter how many videos or pictures you see of this place, you will never fully understand it until you go there in person. It is a sight to behold, I tell you right now. Before I get a ton of these comments down there, I will say, yes, the park is closed at this time of year, but it is still possible to get up to the park. You just have to take a little bit of a hike through the woods to the stairs, and then just be careful because they do get icy this time of year, and climb up the stairs, and you're there. I guess it's not rare for people to do this either. There were still some people up there when we went. What was also already there were cars on the side of the tracks. There were 2 derailments in a row last July here, so the cars still had not been taken away. You can still see some yellow center beams on either side of the curve.
Dynamic brake stuff. I put that door and I got a plate even the manifold on the Waycross.
that, we went back down to the Brickyard Railroad crossing, getting there just in time to set up for an intermodal coming out of Altoona. What I did not know is that this train had a special locomotive in one of the trailing positions. It was one of Norfolk Southern's heritage locomotives, number 8103 for the Norfolk and Western. And there was another train coming down the mountain meeting this one with another heritage unit in trail. Afterwards, we got food and then moved over to Golitsyn, Pennsylvania. Here there are a couple of railroad parks where the Norfolk Southern track splits to go through either the Allegheny Tunnel or the New Portage Tunnel. Now, I won't lie when I say I'm not a huge fan of Golitsyn, because when the tracks split, there's no really regulations as to what trains go on which track, so it's kind of a hit or miss with Golitsyn as to what you'll catch there. I've seen both directions go through both tunnels, all types go through both tunnels, so there's no way to tell whether they'll go which way. This time though, we saw and got lucky when we saw a tank train headed east, and we were able to catch it on the track that goes through the New Portage Tunnel. By the time it got dark, we had made it back to Altoona. This is where most of my night shots will be seen. This is downtown Altoona, Pennsylvania, and there were many street lights and such here, so it was the best way to go for night shots like this. came out later that night after going back to the hotel because I had heard from some rail fans in the area that Norfolk Southern Heritage Unit number 1067 for the B-line service and reading was on NS 20E, an intermodal running east. Thank goodness I looked at the Horseshoe Curve virtual railfan camera before we went back to the hotel, or else I would have never saw that Norfolk Southern Heritage Unit number 1069, the Virginian, was on its way into Altoona. 1069 is definitely my favorite heritage unit from NS, and it's great to see it again, because in 2015, due to my lack of railroad knowledge, I stared right at this engine without even knowing that it was a one-of-a-kind. So finally, with my bearings gathered and cameras ready, we were able to see my favorite heritage unit once again. That was when our night would finally conclude, and the next day we went straight to Golitsyn, and here kind of sums up my point about how either train can go through either tunnel. We got to Golitsyn and there happened to be another tank train now taking the other track through the Allegheny Tunnel instead of the other track which we saw the other one on yesterday. We took the gamble and stuck here a little longer, and we struck gold, as a westbound intermodal happened to take this track and come out of the tunnel. There, we finally made our way into Crescent, Pennsylvania, at the crest of the Allegheny Mountains. There is an NS helper district in Crescent, as well as a Y that leads off to the R.J. Corman Railroad. There is another little railroad park here that is very nice. There's also a little platform where you can set up to film the trains. Turns out when we were in Crescent, we were going to get something pretty rare. Coming off of the R.J. Corman side was an NS grain train. I'm not sure how often NS runs these, but it's not too often, and we caught one here, meeting an intermodal train powering out of a stop. Afterwards, we would move west of Crescent to another railroad crossing that was in the area to catch NS Train 35A with number 1070, the Wabash Heritage Unit, leading. The sun began to set. We made our way back to Altoona to catch a couple of trains at a spot that I had wanted to see for a while. Here at the exit of downtown Altoona stands Alto Tower, an old switch tower that was in service at some point on the NS here, but was put out of service many years ago. For all I knew, this tower would have been demolished by the time we got here in 2019, but it still stands somehow. So without taking any chances, we set up on the bridge to get our shots of Alto Tower for possibly the last time. After going out to eat once again, we came back to downtown Altoona for our nighttime rail fanning, and we heard NS 34A coming out of the yard with NS 8098 in the second position, that being the Conrail Heritage Unit. tonight was the very last night that we had in Altoona, Pennsylvania. I loved the trip up here. Having gone to Horseshoe Curve, Crescent, and Golitsyn were definitely places that I've always wanted to go. Though, tonight was our last night, and these were the last 2 trains that we would see in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The next day, we made the 5.5-hour drive down south to Roanoke, Virginia. After we got there, we had got food and checked into our hotel, and that would send us into the night. It was then the very cold and rainy night of December 29th, 2019 in Roanoke, Virginia. Roanoke, Virginia, as it used to be, is not a huge railroad hub anymore, though there were a few places that I had visited back in 2015 that I had wanted to revisit and get some better shots at. Those spots were based on the Norfolk Southern Blue Ridge District, which runs from Roanoke, Virginia to Crewe, Virginia. I can't really explain this first spot too much because it's very dark and we were only able to catch this one train, but this spot is State Road 606, Layman Road. I will explain this spot the next day when we come back in daylight. The one train that we could catch here was Norfolk Southern Mixed Freight Train 18M, daily mixed freight from Elkhart, Indiana to Crewe, Virginia. And I will admit now that that trip in 2015 that I speak of was the time where somewhere around the town of Roanoke I saw 1069 and didn't even know that I was staring at a blast from the past, not the present. The next morning, we're back out at the tracks. This spot is Berkeley Bottoms, Vinton, Virginia. There's a dozen different names for it, but this is Berkeley Road, just east of the town of Roanoke, Virginia. The surrounding area hosts what looks like a soccer field that has been covered for the winter season, and some streams that flow nearby, and the NS double-tracked Blue Ridge District that passes over this road, heading east, west, wherever in the world. However, the no trespassing signs here are still marked for the Norfolk and Western Railway. Otherwise, there's not really anything special about this spot. I found it in search of a railroad crossing with bells, lights, and gates that wasn't in a no-horn zone. Berkeley Road was the first crossing we fell upon, and after the hour-and-a-half wait that I still remember so well, this was the train we caught. Back to the present, the gates are coming down once again. With new equipment and a new outlook, we set up for NS Train 29G, daily auto rack and intermodal from Portlock Yard at Norfolk, Virginia to North Yard at Detroit, Michigan. We decided to wait a little bit longer to see if anything else would come, and something did. Norfolk Southern Train 189, daily mixed freight from Crewe, Virginia to Elkhart, Indiana, was coming our way, and now that I think about it, this may have been the idea on the train that I caught that 4 years ago. Finally, we make our way back to Lehman Road, where we were last night, and now we can look at it in all of its glory. The Glade Creek passes this road many times, including under the tracks right before the road. There is a house right on the corner of the tracks here. Oh boy, wouldn't that be the railroad place to live. Not too much action, not too little. But when we got there, we didn't have much time at all to set up. We heard a train just seconds away. Norfolk Southern Train 825, as needed empty coal from Lambert's Point in Norfolk, Virginia to Auville, West Virginia. As for Lehman Road, this was a crossing that I had scouted out last time as well due to the scenery, and when we had stopped here last time we didn't catch any trains, so this trip we made a note to make that happen. Lehman Road is situated in the town of Bonsack, Virginia, and provides a view of an almost unobstructed S-curve to the west.
Norfolk Southern, milepost 251.5, track 1, no defects.
Just a little bit later, we catch NS Train 23G, daily intermodal from Louisville, Kentucky to international terminals at Norfolk, Virginia. Now, with the sun having gone down a little bit more, we get to really see the structure of the old S-curve here.
Norfolk Southern, milepost 251.5, track 2, no defects.
Before concluding our rail fanning on the Norfolk Southern Blue Ridge District, we got one more train back at Berkeley Road after the sun went down. Norfolk Southern Train 18M, the same one that we got last night over at Lehman Road in the rain and wind, was coming back again, headed for Crewe, Virginia. Later that night, we did some sightseeing of our own. Since we were in Roanoke for one more night, we decided to go up Mill Mountain and get a view across the city of Roanoke, Virginia at the famous Roanoke Star. From the top of Mill Mountain and the Roanoke Star, along with the balcony and the little park that they have stationed there, the Roanoke Star is one of those places that, just like Horseshoe Curve, the amount of videos and pictures that you'll see of it are irrelevant compared to the feeling that you will receive when you come on your own. The absolute depth and field of a place like this isn't comprehensible through a video such as mine, or anyone else's. Whether in the lights of day or the dead of night, this really is a sight to behold. This was the night of December 30th, 2019. The next morning, we checked out of our hotel and made the drive south to Waycross, Georgia. That would take all of the daylight away from us, so by the time we had checked into our hotel, it was dark. We got something to eat, and by the time 11 o'clock rolled around, we had just a little more time on our hands to try to catch the last trains of the decade. Back on our old CSX trackage headed south, Waycross, Georgia is one of the busiest places on the CSX system, so we knew that we were probably going to get something, and sure enough we did. The first train was actually a work train. A Herzog ballast train under the ID of WO89 was coming south from Fitzgerald, Georgia, coming into Waycross Yard from the north. Moving over to the east side of the yard, we caught our last train for the decade in 2019. CSX train Q40929, a daily mixed freight train running from Selkirk, New York to Waycross, Georgia. And that was it. Railfanning for 2019 had ended at that point. The new year was only about 20 minutes away. We would make it back to our hotel with minutes to spare. Railfanning for 2019 was over, but our trip was not over yet. The sun flying sky high, showed the first day of a new decade and year. On our way south as we checked out of our hotel, we already saw our first train on the way, Q237, we had caught up to on our way south by accident. Q237 is daily loaded auto racks from Louisville, Kentucky to Baldwin, Florida. We were headed to Crawford, Florida for some more rail fanning before making our last journey south, so we would get this guy there later. We pulled into Crawford with a few fair minutes to spare before NS Train 209, intermodal from Inman Yard at Atlanta, Georgia to Bowden Yard at Jacksonville, Florida for interchange to the Florida East Coast Railway, rolled upon us at Crawford. Once 209 got his hiney across the CSX tracks, CSX had one train they needed to get by before NS Train 330 could make his way north or west. CSX Train A76401, a local train with mixed freight cars coming out of Waycross, Georgia, headed to Baldwin for some switching before heading right back to Waycross with two big GE locomotives pulling him south today. Finally, it was NS 330's turn. 330 usually sits in a siding here to wait for every other train to clear before they give him the right-of-way. 330 is a mixed freight train coming out of Bowden Yard at Jacksonville, running to Brosen Yard at Macon, Georgia. Once 330 leaves here, there's going to be nothing on the NS for pretty much the rest of the day. So now it was time for all the CSX trains to make their way across. First one to come was another one that we bypassed on our way down here, Q453, a mixed freight train running daily from Waycross, Georgia to Miami, Florida, came south while we were here too. last to come south on the CSX was the one that we followed here. Q237, loaded auto racks headed to Baldwin, and these guys are obviously wasting no time getting there today. And it would be time for us to leave this place behind and head south. We would follow the S-line all the way because there was a K708 loaded ethanol train bound for Tampa that we were planning to chase to Plant City. But we stopped around Stark because we heard a WO81 calling signals northbound. Looks like this train was also a Herzog ballast train that originated in Wadley, Alabama, came down here to do some maintenance work, and is now heading back north and will eventually arrive back at Wadley. From there, the rest of the ride down to Plant City was spent catching up to and getting ahead of K70827, as needed loaded ethanol from Lafayette, Indiana to Tampa, Florida.
Train number 1. CSX, the engine 43, southbound.
It was around Dade City that we were finally able to get ahead of K708. It was also then that the dispatcher had to tell him that because of 442 coming out of Tampa and another phosphate train blocking the siding at nights, there would have to be another meet for him and 442 at Plant City siding. So all we could do then was grab some Starbucks at Plant City, then head to the cemetery and wait on 442 to arrive, and capture once again the rare sight of two trains meeting at the worn-down Plant City siding. Again, the only reason they're doing this is because Knight's siding is blocked by a phosphate train, although this move isn't getting too rare now because there's been almost 4 phosphate trains without power parked in that siding for extended periods of time within the last few months. As to why, we have no idea. But for whatever reason, it's going on, and this is their only option when it happens. So, after K708 had to sit around nights for about 2 hours waiting on 442 to leave Tampa, they were finally able to make ends meet at around 4:30 p.m. as the monstrous 442 with 6 engines, and I'm not exactly sure how long he was, but it looked like he could barely fit in the Plant City siding. If somebody knows how long Plant City siding is, then that should give you an idea of how long he was today, but they couldn't keep this train moving once he got in there.
With full 42 stuck in the hole, K708 finally had his clear on the main line to come south and make his final miles into Tampa on the new year. I've said this to myself a million times. It seems no matter what kind of railroad trip we're on, it always ends in Plant City. Whether it's across the state or across the country, Plant City has always been the ending point on those trips, and let's hope that it stays that way. So after an amazing trip across the state and up to Pennsylvania, Virginia, and home, here is CSX train K708, 6,000 feet of loaded ethanol, bound for the gasoline terminals in Tampa. My friends, that's the end. That's the end of the train and the end of the trip. If you've made it this far in the video, I can do nothing but say thank you. It was definitely a long one, but honestly it was the easiest thing on terms of editing that I could have done. If you skipped through the video, I don't blame you one bit. It was definitely a long video, but I just like to showcase this amazing trip to Pennsylvania that I will never forget. Special thanks to my amazing family for making this entire trip possible in every way. And I thank all of you for watching, whether you've skipped or made it all the way here. I thank you all for clicking on this video and taking the time to see what my life is about. And I wish absolutely everyone the best of a happy new year. Thanks everybody for watching and tagging along with me on this trip. And back home, I'll see y'all next time on the Sunshine State Rails.